Hi, welcome. It's Susan Cera from Stratus Admissions Counseling. Glad to be here with Abhijit from GMAT Club to talk about how to position yourself to maximize MBA scholarships. Thanks for joining. I'm curious as to who is with us today. If you could put in chat, where are you located? It'll give me a better sense because scholarships in some instances are dependent on your residency as well as your nationality. So I'm curious as to who is with us, and that will kind of help me to make this presentation more valuable to you. So if you can hear me and you're able to put into chat where you are, I'm in the US and I'm from the US. So I would put US/US if you are in the US, but you're from Nigeria, put US/Nigeria. That would be great, and hopefully I'll see some people joining. We've got someone from Uzbekistan and from Southern California, Los Angeles, from India. Fantastic. That's great. Bear with me. I appreciate that we had a little bit of a late start due to some technical difficulties, but hopefully I've got that under control. Again, I'm Susan Cera. I'm from Stratus Admissions, and we're going to talk today about how to position yourself to maximize MBA scholarships. A little bit about me. I'm going to presume throughout this that you can read what's on the slide, so I'm going to tell you more about why I do what I do. I spent 10 years on admissions committee at Duke reading applications from around the world. And there were many times during those 10 years where I would read an application and I knew in my heart that this individual was stronger than what I was seeing in that application, but I could only evaluate them on what they had put in their application. And sometimes that meant it was a deny, but I knew in my heart that they were stronger than what I was seeing. And it's for that reason that 6 years ago I joined Stratus, and now I get great satisfaction out of helping to uncover people's stories and helping them to present their best selves, find the right schools for them. And if scholarship is important, find the schools where they can get the most scholarship for their MBA. With that, coming out of the application cycle that's just closing up now in round 2, this is kind of the client success for Stratus. We worked with about 150 clients who had over 200 acceptances, $8.2 million in merit scholarships. So really great outcomes for many of our clients. A lot of people going to school on full rides. I actually just got an email this morning from a client who had a very generous scholarship and a named fellowship from one particular school, got in somewhere else. And when he went back to the first school, which was UNC Keenan Flagler, and said, "Can you give me an extension on my deadline? Because I was accepted to Michigan Ross and they've offered me money as well. And I want to make sure that I explore and make the right decision for myself." And at that point, UNC came back to him and said, "We're going to double your scholarship. You now have a full ride here." So that made it very, very difficult for him to walk away from with a full ride. So a little bit what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to play it by ear. I want this to be useful to you. So I'm going to, a couple times I'll go back to chat and be looking for input from you rather, to guide how I drill down in different areas here. But first I'm going to talk about why MBA programs offer scholarships. And then the next number of slides and examples are going to be things that you need to be thinking about, the stats for a particular school, going deep on a class profile. We're going to talk about the importance of connecting with the programs that you're applying to, identifying targeted scholarships that might be based on the industry or function you're coming to, or the industry or function that you are heading for. We're also talking about application timing and then some additional considerations. And at the end, how Stratus can help you. So with that, first off, why do MBA programs offer scholarships? Ultimately, schools want to put together really diverse classes. Something that is important to many schools is the rankings. Rankings are published every year, and every year people want to apply to the highest ranked schools, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy to a certain extent. To become a higher ranked school, then more people are going to apply to your school, and so you can accept a smaller percentage of them. You can be more exclusive in who you admit, and hopefully more people are going to yield to your school. Things that are important to schools as they think about scholarships that will bring in the students they want in their class are test scores, GMAT or GRE, as well as your undergrad GPA if it is on a 4.0 scale. If you were graded on some other scale like first class or first class with distinction, or if you're in the UK and you graduated in second class upper division, that's somewhat irrelevant for the US programs. But in the end, these schools want to bring into their program people who align with their values, are going to be strong participants in that program, and continue to promote their brand moving forward. So the first thing I want to think about is consider the stats. So actually, I've got a question for you, and if people could put up in chat, what's your GMAT score? Just chat it up there. What's your GMAT score? The average score at kind of the top 10 business schools in the US in terms of a GMAT is, we'll call it a 730, give or take. It seems to be on the rise every year. One thing to keep in mind is that the very top schools, the M7 or top 10, don't offer a lot of merit scholarship. They don't need to. People will turn down a full ride at a lower ranked school just to go to Wharton or just to go to Harvard. We had a woman this past year who had a 6-figure scholarship from Wharton and turned it down to go to Harvard. But one thing that you need to think about is, where do your stats fall with respect to the stats for a particular program? So if you look beyond the top 10 to schools where the GMAT average is, say, 700 or 706, and you have a 750, you're going to look really good. If the average GPA at a particular school is a 3.4 and you have a 4.0, that's going to look really good. And there may be some willingness to offer scholarship to bring you into the class with those sorts of numbers. So make sure that you're looking at what those incoming class profiles look like and how your stats stack up. Years work experience is one of the stats that's in a class profile, but having more years work experience is not necessarily going to get you a scholarship. And in fact, there's a point at which having more than the average work experience is going to put you out of play because it makes you less of a good fit for that program. I'm going to share some examples here in terms of stats. And this is a woman we worked with this past year whose stats were very strong, but she knew that she wanted to get scholarship, and she was very targeted in the geography of where she wanted to go. She was in Texas, and she really knew she wanted to stay in the Southeast. And there were particular cities that she wanted to be in. She wanted to go into the human capital space, so found programs that had strength in human capital. She probably could have applied to top 10 schools, but she focused on schools that were really in the kind of 15 to 20 or 25 range. And for those schools, her stats looked particularly strong. And she was accepted to all 3 programs that she applied to, which were Vanderbilt Owen, University of Texas Austin, and UNC Kenan-Flagler. And UNC Kenan-Flagler named her a Forte Fellow and gave her, I think it was 75% scholarship. And that ended up being what sealed the deal. She would have been happy at any of those schools. And she had a trailing partner to go with her. And he was going to be able to find a good job in North Carolina, which is a wonderful place to live. That's where I live. And so she'll be heading to UNC this fall. But it's an example of, yes, she probably could have been accepted to perhaps some higher tier schools, but scholarship was important to her. She didn't want to be paying for business school. And by looking at kind of lower tiered schools, she was able to secure really substantial scholarship. I'm going to skip past this example. The next thing I want you to think about is digging deeper into the class profiles. So beyond just the GMAT, the GRE, the average GPAs, think about what the demographics are for a particular class. Is the percentage of women low compared to their peer schools? Is there a low number of international students in that program? Is there a low percentage of military or underrepresented minorities? And if you identify as one of these groups, this is where you need to be looking. A number of years ago, we worked with a guy whose stats were not particularly strong. His profile was very good. He had spent time in the US military, and he found a school that every year had a certain amount of scholarships that they were trying to increase their percentage of military in their class. They wanted, I think it was 7 or 8% military in their class. And he applied even in round 3 and ended up with a full ride to university, Washington University in St. Louis, the Olin School, because they wanted military in their class. It was really important to them. It was a commitment that they had made as a school, and we're looking to grow that presence. So, so looking not only at kind of your demographics, but also think about the class profiles from what industries and functions they come from, as well as what industries they go into. And I'm going to give a couple examples here as we move through. But here's an example. The Johnson College of Business at Cornell University. One of my clients who is just finishing up his first year at Cornell had said to me in the fall, "Hey, Susan, I don't know what happened, but Cornell has only 30% women this year, and they are really upset about it. All of Cornell's peer schools have closer to 40% women, and something just went wrong in terms of their yield in the previous year. So their class of 2022, percentage of women was really low. So when we found the right fit, we really encouraged our female clients to be applying to Cornell, and you'll see the results here on the left. Stratus worked with 8 female applicants who applied to Cornell. All of them were accepted, 7 of them with scholarships, and 7 were named Forte Fellows. Actually, the one who didn't get scholarship was a client who worked with me, and I think Cornell realized that she was probably going to go somewhere else, which is why they didn't offer her any money. And she ended up, she'll be going to Duke, where she got basically a 50% scholarship at Duke, and she clearly would have picked that over $0 at Cornell, and Cornell probably did not have bandwidth to give her more than 50% scholarship. Another thing I want to point out here is Cornell has a 1-year program, which for those of you who might be outside of the US or even in the US and have a master's degree already, you could be eligible for the 1-year MBA program. The countries represented in that program is only 10. Many schools have 30, 40, 50 different countries represented in a class. Obviously, it depends on how many seats there are in that class. But I've had a couple people who came to me from perhaps a less represented country, and I said, hey, you should really look at the Cornell 1-year program, because given the country that you are from, chances are they're not flying that flag for the 1-year MBA program at Cornell, and it could be a really good fit for you. All right, the next thing I want you to think about, again, on that whole idea of international students is, because typically, actually, I'm going to go back here because I want some chat. I know people said where they were from, but I want to know if you guys could chat up, what is your country of nationality? So I can see, I know we had someone who was from India, we had some people in the US, perhaps more people have joined us, and if you could chat me, what is your nationality? And I know if you look at the class profiles for the class of 22 and 23, these numbers are going to be fairly skewed due to COVID and the inability of some of the international students to get to the US to be able to start their programs. But the example I have up, and I may have lost it, but I'm seeing no chat come through. So I think maybe you guys all fell asleep, or you forget where you're from, which would be very sad. In any case, at Vanderbilt, the Owen School of Business. They don't have, many years, they don't have a great representation of international students. And in this particular instance, they have only 13% international. This is in the class of 2022. Typically, maybe they have more like 20, 25%. But 2 years ago, I worked with a client who was from Ghana, and he was in the healthcare space, and Vanderbilt has a fabulous healthcare program. And he was accepted into Vanderbilt with a $35,000 scholarship, which was fantastic for him. They do have a STEM extension on certain concentrations. So he was pursuing an operations concentration within healthcare so that he could get the OPT extension, which was incredibly important to him. And he's graduating just about now. It might have already happened. But this is something that I want you to think about as you move forward if you are from outside of the US. I'm gonna just go back. I'm not seeing any chat. And Abhijit, if I'm missing something, it could be me, but I'm not seeing. Let me see if I'm looking in the wrong place. Here we go. Sorry, I was looking in the wrong place. So we've got a lot of people in India. And we had, and apologize, it was showing up in a different place early on, and now I'm seeing it in the comments. So someone who had a 760 GMAT, you're going to be above the average absolutely everywhere. In terms of, someone's asking about where we get the deep insights on the class profile. So every school is going to have a class profile, and those things that I just showed you. The little bit deeper insight may be looking at their placement reports, which every school publishes as well as their placement reports. And I think Abhijit did respond to that, but I've got quite a few people in India. And so I suspected that, which is why I have this next slide, which is, this is a list of the top 40 US programs which have less than 30% international students. And this is pre-COVID classes, so it's not skewed by the inability of people to have gotten to the US last year. And starting with University of Florida, which had roughly 10% international students, all the way down to Michigan State, which had about 29%. So I'm going to switch it up here because I want to know from those of you who are in India, what is your target industry and or function coming out of business school? Because I'm going to point to a couple of different schools here that I want you to think about that may align with your goals and may result in you being able to get some level of scholarship at some of these schools. I think I'm on the right place in the comments. So looking for. So Siddharth, so we've got technology, fintech, strategy consulting, finance. All right, so great ideas here. So strategy consulting, of these schools, what I'm going to tell you to look at for strategy consulting, University of Minnesota, Carlson, they've created curriculum specifically around casing and preparing people to be consultants. Emory Gosweda, also great in consulting. We had some tech people, either fintech, technology, product management, a couple schools I want you to think about. And this is just an interesting lens through which to look. University of Washington Foster in Seattle, going to put you right in that tech space, and they have incredible placement into technology. Similarly, UT Austin, Texas has a really thriving tech scene. So beyond just what is going on in the curriculum and think about the city in which you are located, okay? And I think for many of these, as you're looking at STEM designations, and I have a couple people said STEM designations, in the last couple years, this has been evolving. Some schools, many schools now have full designation for STEM. Others have specific concentrations or majors for which you get STEM. So let me just go back through here. We've got a whole bunch of people, investment, PEVC. If you're not already in that space, an MBA is not going to get you there. You may need to take an IB route first. And there are a couple people saying IB. For IB, you could look at UNC, Keenan Flagler. They are in North Carolina, but they have phenomenal IB placement. They have a whole trading floor set up on their campus. It's fantastic. So take a good look at UNC Kenan-Flagler. And I'll show you an example of an Indian guy who was offered a full ride at UNC Kenan-Flagler for IB. I've got someone asking healthcare. So of these schools, healthcare, I would say not so many of these, but a couple that I want you to think about: WashU Olin, Vanderbilt Owen for Emory Gosweda is on here, great for healthcare. And UNC Kenan-Flagler is also great for healthcare. Analytics. University of Florida has a business analytics program. And another thing, University of Florida has a 1-year MBA program, and you don't have to have a business background to do that. Let me see if I've covered everything. I did IB, I did technology. Oh, another thing to think about in terms of technology is the location of, where, both for technology and finance. If you can look at a lower tiered school in Boston for finance, so thinking Boston College, Boston University, good options. Similarly, Boston has a very strong tech scene, so those same schools will give you access to a lot of the technology firms. Atlanta, Georgia, interestingly, has some thriving, up and coming tech stuff. So Emory and University of Georgia, Terry might be good for tech as well. Manufacturing, so perhaps supply chain, University of Florida for that, as well as I think University of Washington. I didn't see anyone say energy, but energy, I would go with the Texas schools, Rice University or University of Texas, or even University of Texas, Dallas. So someone has asked, can you elaborate the topic of an MBA not getting you into a specific industry? That was specifically for PEVC. Unless you're already in PEVC, an MBA is not going to get you there immediately. You may need to take a stop in investment banking for a couple of years. They want people who already have experience doing certain things, and an MBA is not going to get you everything that you need. So international business, I'm going to throw out two interesting schools, neither of which happen to be on this list because they may not be top 40 schools, but for international business, University of South Carolina. Marketing, University of Wisconsin. So hopefully those are good. I think if there's anyone who I didn't answer, a slew of things came up all at once on my side screen, so I kind of went back and I think I touched on stuff. But if I missed anyone, please let me know. So strategy, I would say Minnesota, and that's a consulting and strategy. Marketing would be Wisconsin. Anything for sports? So sports, that's a good question, and I'm not sure if there's a particular sport that you're interested in, but look at what look at the sports at that university. If you're not familiar with NCAA sports, University of Florida, huge football school. University of North Carolina, Kenan-Flagler. Need I say more? Basketball. So schools that have really strong sports teams will also have really good placement into the sports industries. Maybe not so much from business school, but at the university level. And there's just an awareness around the sporting culture for some of these really big schools. So UT Austin, perhaps, UNC, University of Florida, perhaps even Georgetown. They've been known to be a very strong basketball powerhouse on and off through the years. And I have a request for repeating healthcare beyond Kenan-Flagler. Emory Gosweda is one. I would also, not on this list, but also I highlighted earlier, Vanderbilt Owen. Other healthcare, Washington University in St. Louis is another one that's probably a lower international population. And government-based manufacturing. I would say that's very specific. I'm going to say Georgetown, because Georgetown is based in DC, and they just have a lot of awareness at the intersection of the public and private space, because they happen to be, there are a lot of people from government roles in their program. And the question is, UNC good for finance opportunities? Absolutely. UNC has great placement specifically into IB, probably also corporate finance. And other finance schools, we have an example, and it's not one that I profile here, but we worked with an Indian client a number of years ago who got a full ride at Brigham Young University, which, if you are not familiar with it, it is run by Mormons and very strong spirituality, but they also have a fabulous program in human capital. And this particular guy wanted to do human resources consulting, and it was a great fit for him. He got a full ride at BYU. I've got a question of, is Southern California a favorable location for strategic consulting? It's not one that jumps out for top of mind as where you would go for strategy consulting. I think Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, even Atlanta, not so much Southern California. Kind of the whole laid back vibe is a disconnect to a certain extent with the consulting lifestyle. So these are great questions. I'm hoping this is valuable for you, and I'm looking back up and down these questions. Someone's asking if work experience helps in getting scholarships. Obviously, your work experience is something that's going to be hopefully a strength in your application, and having more years of work experience is not necessarily going to help with getting a scholarship. It needs to all fit together, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So let me go back to my presentation here, and I'm going to skip that story. But here's one in particular, and I know no one said music industry, but this is a client who came to me. He's a strategy consultant by day, as this says, but his true passion is music. He's really a country musician. In fact, during COVID, when he could work from anywhere, he moved from the Bay Area to Nashville, Tennessee, to the music country music center of the world, so that he could immerse himself in the music scene. And he really when he came to me, he said, Susan, look, what I want to do is stop living two parallel lives, where I spend my mornings writing music, and then I go spend my days doing strategy work, and at night I go back and perform and write more music and engage with musicians. I want to bring those two things together. And he only applied to 3 schools, and they were NYU, Columbia, and UCLA, because these 3, based on the location and kind of job placement, really placed very well into the music industry. He probably, with his stats and his work experience, he had been at McKinsey for a couple of years before he went to strategy at a company. He could have gotten into Stanford or Harvard, but he knew that he truly wants to be in the music space. And so he ultimately, he was accepted to all 3 schools. Out of the gates, UCLA gave him a 6-figure scholarship. And he said to me, Susan, I have trouble turning down that sort of money to go to Columbia, even though Columbia is technically a higher ranked school. I don't think Columbia is going to get me a better job in the music industry than what I could get if I went to UCLA. And I said to him, let's talk about negotiating with Columbia. And I said, what percentage of the scholarship that you have on the books from UCLA would you want from Columbia in order to walk away from this 6-figure scholarship from UCLA? And he said, I don't know, like 40%, 30 or 40%. So he went to Columbia, and ultimately they offered him 80% of what UCLA had offered him. So that was a done deal for him, and he'll be heading to Columbia Business School. If not this fall, he actually may be seeing if he can get a deferral, because his music career is beginning to edge up, and he doesn't want to walk away, and he still wants to bring those 2 worlds together eventually. There was a question that I just saw. it was about work experience. So 6 years of work experience, that's without knowing what that work experience is, how it aligns with your goals, with what a school is looking for, whether or not you're trying to make a career pivot. Your years of work experience is not something, as I said earlier, that's unlike your GMAT being 20 or 40 points above the average helps you. Having an extra year or two of work experience is not going to get you a scholarship in most cases. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is the importance of connecting to the programs. So I think a lot of people miss out on this. I've heard people say, hey, can I just apply to 15 schools? If you're trying to apply to 15 schools, it's unlikely that you're going to do a good job connecting with 15 schools. I suggest that you start with a much shorter list and make sure to take the time to really get to know the program. But first, you need to know where you want a program to take you. What are your goals? How do the resources at that program align with your goals as they might put you towards achieving your career, the career trajectory that you want? So in terms of connecting with the program, I know a lot of people are in India, but maybe some of you have spent some time in the US. A lot of schools love to bring back students who have been with them as undergrads or perhaps in other grad programs. And so this is something that you might consider if you did a grad program or undergrad at a school that has a business school. If you really understand the ethos and values of that university, you may find success in them wanting to bring you back so that rather than retraining a whole or training up an entire class of people on the values of that school, they like to have some people in the class who have lived the values of that university previously and can get others to start drinking the Kool-Aid to really love that school. So this is an example. We had a number of students who were accepted at schools they had attended undergrad, USC, UCLA, Michigan, Duke, University of Pennsylvania. In many instances, a lot of people want to go try something new and different, add another alumni network to their world. But if it's right for you, look at your alma mater. And in some instances, we have people who got accepted to an alma mater, and then we're able to use scholarship offered from that school to negotiate with a different school. Here's an example of a guy who really got to know his school. This is a guy, an Indian national I worked with a couple of years ago, who had come to the US for his master's degree and worked for a technology company in a very, very tech-heavy role. He really wanted to get into finance, specifically in investment banking. We actually, he applied to the school where he had done his master's, which was USC. Unfortunately, was not accepted there, but he was accepted at UNC Kenan-Flagler, and he had deposited there, but he was on a wait list at Cornell. And he ended up getting into Cornell off the wait list pretty late in the summer. I want to say it was July. And he reached out to UNC and he said, I'm going to withdraw. I'm not going to show up in 2 weeks. And UNC came back to him, and this is actually, I grabbed this as a screen capture off of what he had sent me, and this was from someone on the admissions team, that they felt like they had gotten to know him so well, and this particular person had met him when she had gone to Austin, when you could travel and do events. And he ended up actually turning down a full ride at UNC Kenan-Flagler to go to Cornell. He really wanted to be closer to New York City and felt that that was going to help him with IB recruiting. He interned last summer in investment banking and got a return offer. So he is graduating around now. I'm not sure exactly when, but he was an Indian national, offered a full tuition scholarship at Kenan-Flagler and will be going into investment banking. Next thing I want to look at, I want to go back and see if there are any questions here. So actually, let me answer a couple questions here as we go through. I had a question about how is Questrom Business School. It's a Boston-based school, so it's a very good school. You know, it's probably a top 50 school. Great access to finance and technology in the Boston market. So do take a look there. We've worked with people on Questrom. Representation, someone's asking about representation and women in tech from India. There are probably fewer women in tech from India than there are men in tech from India. So, you know, if you are a woman in tech, you know, I would encourage you to look at schools that have a lower percentage of women in their class, as well as lower percentage of international. So a couple that will come to mind: Cornell, Johnson. You know, if depending on where you want to go, though, I don't know if you want to stay in tech and move to a more business-focused role, or if you're looking to use the MBA to change your career entirely. But Cornell is a great school. Carnegie Mellon Tepper, typically lower on their percentage of women than their peer schools. University of Texas Austin, typically, you know, perhaps lower in percentage of women. So what I would look for you, Divya, is schools that have a lower percentage of women. Most of the top programs have 40+%. So look at schools that have, you know, 30, 35 or lower percentage of women, and those would be the schools where you'll get a good look. And especially if you have a high GMAT score, those will be helpful to you. So I've got a question about how does Rotman compare against the US schools? So Rotman's a great program, and I know that many of the folks listening are from India. Going to school in Canada, there's no idea of, you know, an OPT extension and STEM designations as you have here in the US. If you do the 2-year program at Rotman, you are allowed to stay in Canada for, I think it's up to 5 years. And I think you are put on a path to citizenship as well. So Rotman is a really great school. They have fantastic immersion and experiential learning programs, really a fantastic program. You know, I would say if you want to compare it to US schools, it would be ranked in the, you know, 15 to 25 range. So around the likes of UCLA, Cornell, UNC, that group of schools. Got a question of does ZS Associates have a good brand name in the US? Absolutely. It's a fantastic company, very well respected, does a lot of MBA recruiting. So it's recognized as the company from which you might be coming. All right. So next I want to talk about exploring targeted scholarships. So there are a couple of ways that scholarships are targeted. They might be targeted based on the industry from which you are coming or the function from which you are coming. They may be based on some identity about you, whether you're a woman or you're an underrepresented minority, or if you're from a particular country or it's a specific ethnicity. Then there are targeted scholarships that are just the kind of the big name fellowships for each school that are kind of a full ride for the very top people at a particular school. So I'm going to drill down a little bit on each of those. So the distinguished scholarships, and these are typically a 100% full ride for these schools. The Park Leadership Fellows program at Cornell is a cohort of probably 12 or 15 students who have outstanding community engagement in their past and are expected to be leaders in the Cornell community, both during their 2 years on campus as well as in the future. The Knight Hennessy Scholars at Stanford University is a scholarship program, full ride at the university level for all graduates. And so you apply for that before you would even apply to the GSB. And those are really, you know, these are cream of the crop, most amazing stories and outstanding individuals that you can possibly imagine. And different schools call them different things. Dean's Impact Fellowships. And here's an example. This is a client I worked with in the fall who who came from a teaching background with Teach for America, and after spending time in the classroom, stayed with the organization and is really passionate about using technology to level the playing field in education, specifically for people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. So she was looking for schools that had really great strength in technology in that space, because she was hoping to go into a tech company coming out of business school. And in addition to the work that she was doing for a nonprofit organization as her day job, she was also very actively involved in her community. She got into all 4 schools that she applied to. I think she got scholarship at all of them, and Michigan Ross named her a Dean's Impact Fellow. And this was new to Michigan Ross this past year. And it was something where, in addition to a full ride, also came with bells and whistles around access to the dean, invitations to particular leadership opportunities, and a smaller cohort within the broader Michigan Ross Business School of, I think it's the top 5% of the class really are ones that they were expecting to come and make an impact during their time at Michigan Ross and beyond. Another bell and whistle was that they were going to get access to executive education classes before they even start and could do those free of charge. Michigan Ross was also going to be pairing these individuals with alumni of their choice so that they could start networking even before they were feet on the ground in Ann Arbor. So a great win. Another thing to look at is specialized academic scholarships. These are scholarships that come in for all sorts of things, for real estate, for marketing, for healthcare, for finance, social sector, for education, marketing, advertising, you name it, it exists at some school. So dig into these things. If you are coming from a specific industry or function or going towards a particular industry or function, it's important for you to look for these because there might be money specifically for you. One of our clients this past year got the Crew Scholarship at Kellogg. She had come from a construction background, and the Crew Scholarships are specifically designated for women who want to go into commercial real estate. And she actually didn't know that that existed, but got a very substantial scholarship at Northwestern, and it aligned perfectly with her goals. And beyond just the money, it was going to give her introductions to people in the Kellogg network who are in the commercial real estate space. The Pinkard Scholars at Michigan Ross are for people who are in or going into the healthcare space. In addition to the money that comes with it, they pay for participation in conferences and other kind of exposure to industry leaders. The Kilts Marketing Fellowship is at Chicago Booth. One of the things you get with that is being paired with a chief marketing officer who becomes your mentor during your 2 years at Booth. So these are really kind of cool things that if you dig into a school, you can uncover. And here's an example of a guy we worked with a couple years ago. He actually had really not very outstanding undergrad performance, but he knocked it out of the park with his GMAT, which really made up for the lackluster undergrad performance. He happened to work in the consumer packaged goods space in marketing, and so it was a great fit for him. I don't know that he even was aware that Booth had the Kilts Marketing Fellowship, but he was accepted to Booth and named a Kilts Marketing Fellow and got that full ride. He ended up getting into HBS and went there instead. But having that money, as I said, a lot of the top schools don't offer very much scholarship. So HBS really does not offer merit scholarships. It's all based on financial need. So he was willing to walk away from a free ride at Booth to go to HBS, and he's not the only one. I'm going to take a pause here just to check and see if there are more comments coming in. All right, Akshat wants to know, how does Simon compare to the top schools? I actually have an Indian client I worked with a couple of years ago, went to Simon, great ROI. It was one of the very first schools to offer the STEM designation. And quite frankly, for those of you who are from India, what really is going to matter is what your first job is coming out of business school. Because once you have the MBA, it matters less where you have it from. And a guy I worked with a couple of years ago who ended up at Simon landed a job at Walmart in supply chain. It was his dream job, and he got it out of Simon. A lot of people, say, oh, he should have gone to a better school. It's probably a top 30 or 40 school, but great ROI. And I believe he did get scholarship to go there. And he's super happy. And he graduated, I want to say 2017 or it must have been 2018 that he graduated. And so he's been working for Walmart. And because of that STEM extension, it gave him a lot of confidence going into that recruiting. Let me just check here. So INSEAD's a great school. INSEAD does not give a lot of money, so don't be looking for scholarships from INSEAD, although I did work with a woman last year who got the highest level of scholarship you can possibly get to INSEAD. She happened to be a Pakistani woman in the healthcare space, specifically mother-child health, which was very unique, and had done some really cool stuff in that space, and was very committed to making an impact in that space in Pakistan. But INSEAD's a wonderful school, but don't be expecting much in terms of scholarship from them. Going back here, so diversity scholarships, and I want to keep in mind that many of you are, many of the attendees today are in India. So the one thing I will point out here is Forte, which is scholarships for women who have a history of promoting other women in business and who the schools expect will continue to promote women in business during their time in business school and beyond. Forte fellows are designated by the school, and you get a minimum of, I think it's $15,000 a year to be named a Forte fellow. And you kind of become part of a network of women across top business schools where they have events every year. They typically have a big conference in the summer that brings together the Forte fellows who are currently in business school with the incoming Forte fellows and a lot of recruiters who want to be hiring women. So great opportunity there. Other two things that I want to point out here are Reaching Out MBA, or RAMBA, offers designates one fellow at each of like 40 different business schools, someone who identifies as LGBTQ. So if you identify as LGBTQ, if you are out in your application, once you're accepted to business school, then you can let RAMBA know that you've been accepted to a particular school and you want to be considered for their fellowship. The other one I want to point out is the PRISM Fellowship, which again, for another LGBTQ individual, it was created just last year by Wharton and specifically going to someone who identifies as LGBTQ. I think many of the other ones here are, American military, underrepresented minorities, so they may not apply to those of you who are in India. So I'm going to skip that. In terms of application timing, we're going to talk about this a little bit. You want to apply in round one when there is more funding to be had. There's a client that I worked with this past year who, due to her not so stellar test scores, delayed from round one into round two. She came from a healthcare background, extremely committed to healthcare, especially for underrepresented people from socioeconomic backgrounds that are disadvantaged. And Michigan Ross was one of her top choices, and she was really hopeful that she would be named a Pinkert Scholar, those specific scholarships for people in the healthcare space. She got some scholarship from Michigan Ross, but was not named a Pinkert Scholar. And one thing I said to her is, it's quite possible that there's a limited pool of money for that particular scholarship, and it was given to people in round one. And so there was no money left, and there may only be enough for 6 people to be named Pinkert Scholars, and those were all taken up in round one. So At round one, none of the funding has been given out. Schools do have a limited pool of resources that they can use for scholarships, so apply in round one if you can. But you don't want to apply if you're not going to put forth your strongest application, or if you're not the strongest possible applicant that you might be or might become. Additional considerations for this, I'm going to skip past my slide afterwards, but with the assumption that many of you are in India, I've worked with numerous Indian candidates over the years, many of whom already have a master's degree. Depending on what you want to do, you may start looking for one-year programs. So if you're in the tech space, for example, and you want to transition from a more technical role to being a product manager, take a look at the Cornell Tech MBA program, which is a one-year program, which means you're only paying 1 year of tuition, not 2. NYU also has a tech MBA program. Again, although you may not get scholarship, instead of going to school for 2 years, you're only giving up income for 1 year. Another would be something like Carnegie Mellon's Masters of Science in Product Management. There are some other schools that do offer one-year programs, typically for people who already have a business background. Kellogg has a 1Y program. Duke has an accelerated MBA program, but there are certain restrictions on who can apply to those. There are a number of schools that just have a one-year program. Emory comes to mind, University of Florida comes to mind, and there are scholarships for those. Presuming that you are in India and doing a part-time MBA or an executive MBA that's not full-time, feet on the ground, probably not considerations. So I'm going to just, rather than talking about how Stratus can help you, I want to actually be helping you guys right now. So I'm going to go back and see if there are questions that have come up. Yeah, people are throwing out like little bits of their profile at me, and I really can't address those. You know, the purpose of this was really to talk about scholarship, not, you know, can I get into these schools? So I'm going to do more general questions. If you do want to have a conversation with me or someone else on the Stratus team, you can feel free to go to our website and sign up for a free consultation. But this is an interesting question, which is, how are desk jobs viewed against more practical or field jobs? In terms of background, I guess. You know, you need to make the most out of whatever jobs you have, and make sure to present in your applications what skills and knowledge that you bring to the table. There aren't a ton of people in business school who have had those practical or field jobs, mostly engineers, but primarily I think people have desk jobs. And so those who have rolled up their sleeves and actually done something bring a perspective that could be very much valued in a business school program. But during my time at Duke, I spent at least 5 years reading Indian applications, and what I saw most frequently was people who maybe had technical jobs or practical jobs, who basically were trying to use an MBA to do a complete reset, throw everything they had spent the last 3 to 6 years on out the window and said, I want to go into investment banking, or I want to go into consulting. You're much better served with looking to make a smaller pivot where you can build on the experience that you have, the knowledge and the skills that you've developed, and perhaps in the same industry, move to a different function. It'll serve you much better. Let me just scroll down here and see. This is a great question, and thank you for asking it, Divya. What's the difference between a tech MBA and an MBA with a STEM specialization? What are a few programs that offer a STEM specialization? I wish I knew a way to, there's an article on our website that has a lot of the lists of schools that have STEM designations, so look for that. But the difference between a tech MBA and an MBA with the STEM specialization. The 2 tech MBA programs that I mentioned were Cornell Tech and NYU Tech MBA. Those 2 were created because business schools were finding the following. Students would come in, do their first year business, first year of MBA, core curriculum, maybe a couple of electives. They'd go off and work for early stage companies for their summer internships, or maybe even larger tech companies. And at the end of the summer internships, the companies were saying to these students, we need you now. Why don't you just stay? And the students would go, but I didn't finish my degree. Like I spent a whole year and I paid all this money to go to business school, but I don't have my degree. Although I love this job, I'm not going to drop out of business school and not complete my degree and have it on my resume. So NYU actually was the first school to address this by creating their Tech MBA program, which creates a 1-year, so it's a 12-month program where you do core curriculum at the beginning, and over the course of kind of the second half of the program, you're working on a project for a technology company, and it's kind of an internship / classroom experience blended together, and you finish your degree after that 1 year. And many of the companies that are sponsoring those projects for the Tech MBA students then go on to hire the people after that 1 year. And so the STEM specialization, many schools now have the STEM designation for their overall program as well, and others have it just for specific concentrations or majors. I can't go through the comprehensive list right now as to what that is, but every year there seem to be more and more of them because this was a way for business schools to ensure that they were still bringing in really high qualified candidates from outside of the US and making it easy for recruiters to hire these people, knowing that they could stay for 3 years rather than just 2. And someone else asked, do any of the 1-year programs have a STEM extension? I do not know the answer to that off the top of my head. There are a lot of people asking individual questions like, I'm trying to switch industries. How likely am I to be considered for a scholarship? Scholarship depends on the strength of your application. So, if you have stats that are way above the average for the school, if you are a woman for a school, applying to a school that doesn't have a lot of women, and that school is going to set you up for success in making a career change, you could be considered for scholarship. All right, I'm looking at my clock and I'm past the top of the hour. Hopefully this has been helpful to you guys. I like that it was more interactive. Wish I could have heard your voices, and I apologize that I wasn't finding the comments at first. But I want to thank you for joining us. If you are interested in having that one-on-one conversation, go to the Stratus webpage. On every single page is a free consultation link, or just sign up for our newsletter so you can get updated information from us about the application process. And I wish you guys all the best as you uncover what your goals are and find the schools that are going to be the right fit for you, and hopefully get some scholarship in the meantime. So thanks, and have a great rest of your day.